Albert Einstein once described man as a lazy animal. He said if nothing spurs him on, then he will hardly think, and he will behave from habit, like an automaton. My name is Tricia Sulpizio. I'm your host for another episode of Tea and Bedtime Stories, a podcast for anyone who likes books. In this episode, we'll continue reading A Farewell to Arms, a novel by Ernest Hemingway, published in 1929. The last time we read Chapter 2 in Book 1, and now we'll continue the story with Chapter 3. As per usual, after reading the chapter, I will follow up with quick facts and my impressions. So let's continue with Book 1, Chapter 3. When I came back to the front, we still lived in that town. There were many more guns in the country around, and the spring had come. The fields were green, and there were small green shoots on the vines, and the trees along the road had small leaves, and a breeze came from the sea. I saw the town with the hill and the old castle above it in a cup in the hills with the mountains beyond, brown mountains with little green on their slopes. In the town there were more guns, there were some new hospitals, and you met British men and sometimes women on the street, and a few more houses had been hit by shell fire. It was warm, and like the spring, I walked down the alleyways of trees, warmed by the sun on the wall, and found we still lived in the same house, and that it all looked the same as when I had left. The door was open. There was a soldier sitting on a bench outside in the sun. An ambulance was waiting by the side door, and inside the door, as I went in, there was the smell of marble floors and hospital. It was all as I had left it, except that now it was spring. I looked in the door of the big room and saw a major sitting at his desk. The window open and the sunlight coming into the room. He did not see me, and I did not know whether to go in and report or go upstairs and clean up. I decided to go upstairs. The room I shared with the Lieutenant Rinaldi looked out on the courtyard. The window was open, my bed was made up with blankets, and my things hung on the wall. The gas mask in a long oblong tin can, the steel helmet on the same peg. At the foot of the bed was my flank trunk and my winter boots. The leather, shiny with oil, were on the trunk. My Austrian sniper's rifle with its blued octagon barrel and the lovely dark walnut, cheek-fitted shoots and stock hung over the two beds. The telescope that fitted it was, I remembered, locked in the trunk. The Lieutenant, Rinaldi, lay asleep on the other bed. He woke when he heard me in the room and sat up. "Ciao," he said. "What kind of time did you have?" "Magnificent." We shook hands, and he put his arm around my neck and kissed me. "Oof," I said. "You're dirty," he said. "You ought to wash." "Where did you go and what did you do? Tell me everything at once." "I went everywhere. Milan, Florence, Rome, Naples, Via San Giovanni, Messina, Taormina." "You talk like a timetable. Did you have any beautiful adventures?" "Yes." "Where?" "Milano, Firenze, Roma, Napoli." "That's enough. Tell me really, what was the best?" "In Milano." "That was because it was first?" "Where did you meet her?" "In the Corva." "Where did you go? How did you feel? Tell me everything at once." "Did you stay all night?" "Yes." "That's nothing. Here now we have beautiful girls, new girls, never been to the front before." "Wonderful. You don't believe me? We will go now, this afternoon, and see. And in the town we have beautiful English girls. I am now in love with Miss Barkley. I will take you to call. I will probably marry Miss Barkley. I have to get washed and report. Doesn't anybody work now? Since you are gone, we have nothing but frostbites, chilblains, jaundice, gonorrhea, self-inflicted wounds, pneumonia, and hard and soft cankers. Every week someone gets wounded by rock fragments. There are a few real wounded. Next week the war starts again. Perhaps it starts again. They say so. Do you think I would do right to marry Miss Barkley? After the war, of course. Absolutely, I said, and poured the basin full of water. Tonight, you will tell me everything, said Rinaldi. Now I must go back to sleep to be fresh and beautiful for Miss Barkley. I took off my tunic and shirt and washed in the cold water in the basin. While I rubbed myself with the towel, I looked around the room and out the window and at Rinaldi lying with his eyes closed on the bed. He was good looking. He was my age, and he came from Amalfi. He loved being a surgeon, and we were great friends. While I was looking at him, he opened his eyes. Have you any money? Yes. Loan me 15 lire. I dried my hands and took it out my pocketbook from the inside of my tunic hanging on the wall. Rinaldi took a note, folded it without rising from the bed, and slid it in his breeches pocket. He smiled. I must make on Miss Barkley the impression of a man of sufficient wealth. You are my great and good friend and financial protector. Go to hell, I said. That night at the mess, I sat next to the priest, and he was disappointed and suddenly hurt that I had not gone to Abruzzi. He had written to his father and I was coming, and they had made preparations. I myself felt as badly as he did and could not understand why I had not gone. It was what I'd wanted to do, and I tried to explain how one thing had led to another, and finally he saw it and understood that I had really wanted to go, and it was almost all right. I had drunk much wine and afterwards coffee and strega, and I explained winefully how we did not do the things we wanted to do. We never did such things. We two were talking while the others argued. I had wanted to go to Abruzzi. I had gone to no place where the roads were frozen and hard as iron, where it was clear, cold, and dry, and the snow was dry and powdery, and hair tracks in the snow, and the peasants took off their hats and called you Lord, and there was good hunting. I had gone to no such place, but to the smoke of cafes, and nights when the room whirled, and you needed to look at the wall to make it stop. Nights in bed, drunk, when you knew that that was all there was, and the strange excitement of waking and not knowing who it was with you, and the world all unreal in the dark, and so exciting that you must resume again, unknowing and not caring in the night. Sure, this was all in all, and not caring. Suddenly to care very much, and to sleep, to wake with it, sometimes morning, and all that had been there gone, everything sharp and hard and clear, and sometimes a dispute about the cost. Sometimes still pleasant and fond and warm, and breakfast and lunch. Sometimes all niceness gone and glad to get out on the street, but always another day starting and then another night. I tried to tell about the night and the differences between the night and the day and how the night was better, unless the day was very clean and cold and I could not tell it, as I cannot tell it now. But if you have had it, you know. He had not had it, but he understood that I had really wanted to go to Abruzzi, but had not gone, and we were still friends, with many tastes alike, but with the differences between us. He had always known what I did not know, and what, when I heard it, I was always able to forget. But I didn't know that then, although I learned it later. In the meantime, we were all at the mess, the meal was finished, and the argument went on. We two stopped talking, and the captain shouted, "Priest not happy! Priest not happy without girls!" "I am happy," said the priest. "Priest not happy. Priest wants Austrians to win the war," said the captain. The others listened. The priest shook his head. "No," he said. "Priest wants us never to attack." "Don't you want us never to attack?" "No. If there is a war, I suppose we must attack, shall attack." The priest nodded. "Leave him alone," the major said. "He's all right." He can't do anything about it anyway, the captain said. We all got up and left the table. Okay, that concludes the end of chapter 3 of book 1. So just some quick facts for clarification. A major outranks a captain outranks a lieutenant. I don't know if you care. But the narrator and his roommate are obviously lieutenants, or they wouldn't be together. And it's very clear that they live much better conditions than enlisted men. Just, you can tell from their descriptions of their living quarters and their meals. I assure you, I mean, I wasn't there, but I'm pretty sure that enlisted men were not having wine with dinner every night and a full quarter to them, shared quarter and access to all the things that he describes there. So anyway, the author mentions his gas mask canister, and it's kind of an interesting fact. But contrary to popular belief, chemical weapons were first used by French troops. They used these tear gas grenades in 1914. But Germany was the ones where the soldiers who used them en masse during the Second Battle of Ypres in Belgium in 1915. They would bring out these gigantic canisters and just open them up. Horrible. Anyway, in the decades following, obviously, chemical warfare was still a problem in World War II. And, then we had the Korean conflict and Vietnam. So they were marketed to families for decades as home protection equipment. In fact, Disney was rumored to have designed a Mickey Mouse gas mask for kids. It was never produced or sold. But I did link a link in the description to the History Channel's website. And you can watch a video of them actually testing gas masks, gassing kids to show that their gas masks work. I hope the aerosol spray that they sprayed these kids with was nothing harmful, but you never know. It was the 50s. People were utterly clueless. But anyway, I don't know if you caught that, but he was talking about chilblains. If you knew what those were, good for you. I had no clue, so I had to look it up. But I guess they're those painful, irritating, inflammatory skin infections that you get on, your knuckles, the knuckles of your hands and your feet. It's due to poor circulation in cold weather, not freezing, but cold weather. It looks like red to purplish little blisters on your knuckles. And they can last for years. They more often affect women and people who are underweight, which is probably why they were complaining of them so much there at that time. And the cankers that he mentions too, those are most commonly associated with syphilis, which is a venereal disease. It's creepy that was just a part of their everyday life. I'm sorry, I'm projecting. But anyway, he also talks about strega, which is an Italian liqueur made from herbs. I had no idea what that was, so I had to look it up too. But apparently it's just what they call a digestif, which is something that helps you digest your food. If you eat a very rich meal, they'll often recommend a fortified wine, some brandy like cognac, or sambuca, or even ouzo, depending on where you're from. There are different types of digestifs. But yeah, that's all the fun facts that I have about the book chapter. My impressions. This chapter, it's kind of cute that it starts with the spring and he mentions the small green shoots on the vines, which again, kind of, I don't know, it makes me feel like the author's age and inexperience are kind of prevalent in his writing, because his thoughts seem, I don't know, not careless, but innocent and naive. It's like he's describing a camping trip, summer camp, more than being in the middle of one of the most destructive conflicts in world history. It just doesn't sound like that. I don't know if that's purposeful or happenstance, but It's interesting to contemplate his state of mind. Anyway, the fact that he's in a different class, being an officer and an ambulance driver, means he's kind of nearby the war, but not really in it, meaning he's being shielded from a lot of the consequences of war that perhaps an enlisted soldier might experience, or even a civilian experience. But maybe he's ignoring these things as a way of coping, because the reality is easier to ignore than to deal with head on. I don't know. These are just my impressions. Yours might be very different. And I don't know, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it, regardless of whether you agree with me or not. But his leave spent being intoxicated and going from one brothel to another, I'm pretty sure that's what he was describing. It was a little bit vague. And I think he kind of got into like a stream of consciousness thing. I don't know. It was oddly descriptive, without being very straightforward. But anyway, it just made his entire lifestyle, being based around such trivial activities, it just made his life seem futile or useless. Maybe that's what he was trying to convey. I don't know. But when he comments, doesn't anybody work around here or something like that, it does kind of give credence to the idea that they were a little bit sheltered from the real war, so to speak. Like they were more like observers than they were in it, like waiters, not really the patrons eating at the restaurant. I don't know. I hope you know what I'm saying. I don't yet understand either why the captain insists on picking on the priest so much. I hope that gets resolved later in the story. Maybe he's just trying to build tension or something around that relationship. But right now it feels really unnecessary. I don't know, call me a snowflake, but I just keep thinking, like, what's that guy's problem? Just leave the man alone. I don't know. Maybe he's jealous. Who knows? Okay, but their exchanges do kind of highlight the cultural expectations placed on men of that generation. And I hate to admit it, but some subcultures in American society today still buy into the idea that having a high sex drive and sleeping with as many women as possible is the only way to really prove that you're a real man. They convince themselves that that's normal and that everything else is temperance, which I think is crazy. And I'll tell you the truth, they're wrong. I just know, because the operative statement there is that they convince themselves that what they're doing is good and right. I'll tell you a short story about this drunk guy that I met one time at a bar, I think, somewhere. It was years ago, but he was like with a bunch of friends. They were doing a bachelor party thing, weekend or something like that. And he just comes up to me and he's like, I love my wife. And I was like, oh, okay. Interesting. He's like, I don't know why I just got that girl's phone number. And I was like, okay. He's like, I love my wife. Good for you. And he's like, I'll probably ask for your number too. But I love my wife. And I was like, what are you doing? He was drunk. I didn't care if I hurt his feelings. So I just had to know, like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, And I was like, that makes no sense. No what? He's like, well, sometimes you just got to see if you still got it. I was like, first of all, if you have to ask if you still got it or wonder if you still got it, you don't got it. And second of all, who's impressed by that information? Because he was like a grown man, like in his 30s. And it just seemed like the stupidest thing I'd ever heard in my life. Of course, he was drunk, but still. But he obviously buys into that idea, him and his idiot friends. buy into the idea that, getting girls or whatever is still like what defines his status as a man. But you can see, getting back to the story, sorry about that little tangent, but you can see how that belief gets reinforced for the men in the story, just like they did for that young man in that group. Because it's all they talk about, and it's all they do, apparently, every day, right? Him and his roommate, that's all they were talking about, was getting girls. And so far, that seems to be all they ever talk about or worry about. And so, apparently, in their culture, men who don't act like primates are not considered real men, which is, I suspect, why the colonel is picking on the priest. Or the captain, sorry, not colonel. The captain is picking on the priest. But I do think it's interesting because they would never be able to get away with that kind of behavior at home. It's the war that makes their lifestyle possible. And I think we're starting to get a sense of the inner conflicts that the main character is having with himself. Right? He complains that people don't do what they really want to do or something like that. He's kind of trying to distance himself from his own behavior, but also trying to claim that his experiences are, expected, or that it's universal. And he's behaving like an automaton. But that's all I have for Chapter 3. In the next episode, I'll continue Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway with Book 1, Chapter 5. Again, I'd love to hear your impressions. Please leave a comment. Let me know. Sup, chat. That's what my kids would say. Have a great evening. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks for listening.